Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure for me to welcome you to the Baker Institute for tonight's discussion on urban migration, the case of Houston. As you may know, this panel is part of the Americas Project, which is an annual program we have at the Baker Institute, and where we bring young leaders from the Americas to discuss different issues of importance to the region. Tonight we have with us 15 young fellows from 15 different countries in the Americas, and for the next few days they will be discussing these issues amongst themselves and sharing ideas and challenges. This year, the world reached a significant milestone, and that is that for the first time in history, more than half of the world's population lives in urban areas. Urban migration, whether across national boundaries or internal, is sometimes perceived as a threat, especially when we look at poverty concentration and social disruption. However, if we look at several reports, one of them being the United Nations Population Fund State of the World Population, we can see that the potential benefits of urbanization outweigh the disadvantages, and migration has a lot to do with it. The challenge we have is to learn how to exploit those benefits and use them to the community's advantage. To a great extent, our future greatly depends on decisions and proactive policies from the governments and citizens to make to make the right decisions to prepare for this continued growth we have ahead of us. Tonight we have a remarkable group of speakers whose expertise will help us gain a better understanding of some of the key issues facing the cities of the Americas through the lens of Houston. I am honored to present our panelists, and I ask you to please, because of our time constraint, look at their detailed and impressive bios in your program. We have Dr. Steven Kleinberg, who's a professor of sociology at Rice and the director of the Houston Area Survey, which he has conducted for over 25 years, and we're lucky to have him at Rice and in Houston, of course. He will give us an overview of Houston's demographic transformation, and he will be our moderator tonight. Then we have Tom Forrester Lord, who's the president of the Housing Corporation and also a lecturer at Rice School of Architecture. He will focus on affordable housing in the city. Then we have Michael Emerson, who's a professor of sociology at Rice as well, and director of Rice Center on Race, Religion, excuse me, and Urban Life. He will offer us his perspective on public policy and sustainability. Then we have Tammy Daly, who's the Central Region Executive Principal of the Houston Independent School District, and she will address the question of public education. After we listen to our panelists, we will have a few minutes for questions and answers. There's cards in your seats, so we'll collect those, and we'll have Dr. Kleinberg try to get to as many as we can. So please join me in welcoming our panelists.
So the magic is going to turn on my PowerPoint in a second. Let's see if that works. I'm Steve Kleinberg. I'm honored to be here and delighted to welcome all of you. And this is a wonderful opportunity to explore the tremendous transformations and the possibilities and opportunities that lie ahead as we think of these cities across the world and the interactions and transnational relationships among cities. None more interesting, I think, more centrally located in that nexus than Houston, Texas. Let me see if I can figure out how do I turn this, how do I make the slides move? I got it. All these I long for the old days of transparencies when you could just come and great. Can you all see that a little bit? This is, I want to report on our Houston area survey that many of you know about, that we've been doing now for 27 years. We begin the 28th year in February of 2009. a random representative sample of Harris County residents reached with random telephone numbers, random adults in each random household, asking people for the last 27 years, how do you see the world? What's happening in your life? And we have watched the world change. Houston went into major recession with the collapse of the oil boom in 1982, and then recovered into a restructured economy and a demographic revolution. And I want to just remind us very quickly what that looks like and what its connection is, of course, to Latin America. The resource economy of the industrial age has disappeared. The source of wealth from now on is knowledge. The blue-collar path to economic security is gone forever. Someone graduating from a high school in America with a high school diploma coming out into the Houston American workforce can no longer expect to be able to make a middle-class wage. What you earn depends on what you have learned. Education has become critical, and we're watching a growing gap between rich and poor, growing inequalities predicated above all else on education. One example of the inequalities in Houston is that we have the greatest medical complex on the face of this planet, and we have the highest percentage of children without health insurance of any major city in America. That gap between rich and poor is a central challenge as we go forward to find a way to ensure that all Americans can share in the prosperity of the country, but it's above all a reminder of how critical education has become for opportunities to support a family and to have a decent living. The other great revolution is, of course, the demographic revolution. This is a chart showing the number of immigrants coming to this country in each of the last decades, from the 1820s through the year 2000. I don't know if you can see it pretty well, but there we go. This was in the 1840s. Of course, it was the Irish pouring into America with the potato famine. And I need not remind you what we thought of the Irish. The anti-immigrant feelings have always been just beneath the surface in America. We love the idea of being a nation of immigrants in this country, but we've never been comfortable when large numbers of foreign-born residents were in our midst. And it's not surprising that there's some of this new anti-immigrant feelings coming once again. As you can see, just very quickly, this was a civil war here, and then 15.9 million immigrants came here between 1890 and 1914. They were coming from Europe, but they were coming from Southern and Eastern Europe, and they weren't Protestants, they were Catholics and Jews, and they were coming to take our jobs and destroy our country, and we responded with a viciously racist law in 1924 that said, from now on you can come here in direct proportion to which your ethnicity and nationality is represented in the census of 1890 to ensure that Northern Europeans would be given preference, and the law codified the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 to declare that Asians are an inferior subspecies of humanity, ineligible from ever becoming American citizens. Asians were banned entirely from the country, and for 50 years there was very little immigration in America. This is, of course, dropping the Great Depression. I tell people, you really want to stop immigration in America, engineer a Great Depression, right? We were a nation of immigrants at the beginning of the 20th century, and we become a nation of immigrants again. But for 50 years, there were very few immigrants in America. The law could not survive the shifts of consciousness with the civil rights movements. Kennedy's assassination in 1965, Congress changed the law, and for the first time, large numbers of non-Europeans were allowed to come to America. In the 1960s, about 3.5 million immigrants came. Only 38% were from Europe. In the 1970s, 5 million came. Only 18% were Europeans. In the 1980s, about 10 million new immigrants came to this country. In the 1990s, about 11.5 million immigrants came. 88% coming from Asia, Latin America, Africa, and the Caribbean. And the United States, that throughout all of its history been an amalgam of European nationalities, has become a microcosm of the world. The first nation in history that can say, we are a free people, and now we come from everywhere. And it's a remarkable change, not surprisingly creating anxieties of various sorts. We are locked into the national and into the global economy, and America is becoming a microcosm of the world. Immigration is network-driven. There are 2 cities that contain about 1/3 of all the foreign-born residents of America live in or around Los Angeles and New York, followed by lesser magnet cities, Miami, San Francisco, Chicago, Houston, followed right after Houston by San Diego, Washington, D.C., Dallas, Boston, Atlanta, and now spreading to every city and town across America. No city has been transformed as fully, as completely, as suddenly, as irreversibly as Houston, Texas. This city, it is fair to say, throughout all of its history, was a biracial southern city dominated and controlled in an automatic, taken-for-granted way by white men. And in the space of 20 years has become one of the most ethnically and culturally diverse cities in the country. Here's census figures. Wrong button. Census figures for Harris County in each of the last 5 decades, and then the census estimates for 2006. These are the Anglos. You can see this biracial world we were in 1960, 74% Anglo, 20% African-American, 6% Hispanic, less than 0.5% Asian. During the oil boom of the 70s and 80s, it was Anglos pouring into Houston because this is where the jobs were. And by 1980, Houston had become the 4th largest city in America, having surpassed Philadelphia, still an overwhelmingly Anglo city, 63% Anglo, now 20% African-American, 16% Hispanic, 2% Asian. The Anglo population between 1970 and 1980 grew by 25%. Then came the oil bust, and between 1980 and 1990, the Anglo population grew by 1%. Between 1990 and 2000, the Anglo population actually dropped by 6.3%. Meanwhile, during the 1990s, as the Anglo population was dropping, the African-American population grew by 22%, the Hispanic population by 74%, the Asian population by 76%, and by the year 2000, there were 3.4 million people living in Harris County, Texas, all of us now minorities. And the census estimates back in 2006 was that already then there were more Hispanics than Anglos living in Harris County, Texas. Remarkable transformation. Had Houston not been one of the great magnets for the new immigration of the last 25 years, this city would have lost population and lost its status as a major city. Cities such as Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, St. Louis, Baltimore, Detroit, Buffalo, Cleveland, Cincinnati. Instead, Houston is one of the most vibrant, rapidly growing cities in America, purely because of the vitality, ambition, energy, entrepreneurial spirit of immigrants coming here from Asia, Latin America, Africa, and the Caribbean. It is probably safe to say that no city has benefited more from immigration than Houston, Texas. And just a couple of other very quick thoughts here is one of the things that's so interesting, I think, about Houston is that we have a more even distribution among the 4 great communities of America than any of the other multi-ethnic melting pot cities. There are very few Asians in Miami. There are very few Hispanics in San Francisco. There are very few African Americans in Los Angeles. Here is where we all meet. All of us minorities, all of us called on to build the new multi-ethnic society that will be Houston and America and Texas and America in the 21st century. One other quick point, Houston is about 4 years ahead of Texas. In August of 2004, Census announced Texas has now joined California as the 2 largest states in the union, both of which are majority-minority states. And the census says, hold on to your hats, by 2010, in a year and a half when we do our count for 2010, we think there will be 10 to 12 majority-minority states. And by 2040, the entire population of the United States will be majority-minority, a country that had been deliberately an amalgam only of European nationalities, where for the first time by 2040, the majority of Americans will no longer trace their ancestry to Europe, and we will become fully a microcosm of the world. That American future is here in Houston. And it seems to me fair to say that how Houston navigates this transition to build a truly successful, inclusive, multi-ethnic society will have enormous implications, not just for the Houston future, but for the American future. This is where, in a very real way, the American future is going to be worked out. 2 other quick points, and then I'll have to sit down. One is, it's not just numbers, it's also ages. The older folk in America are disproportionately Anglo because they were the ones to have been born here in the 20s and 30s and be moving into senior status, and we have not seen anything yet. 76 million American babies were born in this country between 1946 and 1964. In that incredible period after World War II, when the rising tide did indeed lift all boats, when the average American man, wherever he was in the American economic structure, doubled his income between 1950 and 1970 in real terms. And those were the years when we celebrated the stay-at-home housewife mother in suburbia. The average American woman gave birth to 3.6 children, and the baby boom was launched upon the land, preceded and followed by baby bust generation, so it's a bulge in the system. Demographers talk about it like a pig being swallowed by a python, and you see it sort of going through the system. Not very healthy, they tell us, either for the pig or the python. The leading edge of those baby boomers turned 62 this year. And we are going to watch a literal doubling in the number of Americans over the age of 65 in the next 25 years. All of America's population is going to be more skewed in the direction of old folks than the population of Florida is today. We are going to be preoccupied in our politics by issues of Social Security and Medicare and access to Botox. You can sort of see it coming. It is overwhelmingly Anglos who are disproportionately represented among the baby boom generation because they were the ones who have been born here between 1946 and 1964. It was not until 1965 when, for the first time in the 20th century, large numbers of non-Europeans were allowed to come to this country. So the young people in America across the board are disproportionately non-Anglo. Nowhere is that clearer than in Houston. Houston is a city of migrants. You migrate when you're a young man or woman. We were first a city of Anglo migrants during the oil boom, and then for the last 25 years, the Anglo population has stabilized, and all the new migrants coming to this country are coming from Asia, Latin America, Africa, and the Caribbean into Houston. And here is a powerful picture of Houston's present and future. Of all the people currently living in Harris County, Texas, age 60 and older, 69% are Anglos, 17% are African Americans, 11% are Hispanics, 3% are Asians. At each younger age group, especially, of course, after the baby boom, sitting right here, the percentage of Anglos plummets. The percentage of African Americans, Asians, and above all, Hispanics surges. You reach the young adults, age 18 to 29, 45% are Hispanics, 23% African Americans, 7% are Asians, fewer than 25% are Anglos. And it is a remarkable moment where literally 70% of everybody over 60 is Anglo, and more than 75% of everybody under 30 is non-Anglo. And I tell people, this is a done deal. Close the borders tomorrow. Not another immigrant comes to these shores. 60-year-old Anglos are not going to be making a whole lot more babies. I tell everybody we'll do the best we can. We'll work on it every chance we get. You can go to the bank on this. Every business is going to figure out either how to capitalize on the growing diversity of Houston or find it harder and harder to grow their business. Every institution in Houston was built by, for, and on behalf of Anglos. Every one of them has to transform itself to become Houston's institution in the 21st century. It's a remarkably interesting and important moment. And a big part of that, of course, is the connections that Houston has as the gateway to Latin America and the immigration that has transformed this city. One other critical piece in here is, of course, it's a bifurcated immigration stream coming into a bifurcated economy. One group of immigrants are coming here with higher levels of professional skills than we have ever seen in the history of immigration to America. They are overwhelmingly Asian and African because they were the core of American immigration policy in 1965 was family reunification. There was no one for any African or Asian to family reunify with because they had been banned entirely from coming to this country. The only way you could get here was to qualify as a professional of exceptional ability, to have skills that were demonstrably needed and in short supply, and the key example there is the Filipino nurses, or to qualify for refugee status, as was the case for many Vietnamese. But the Asian immigrants are coming here with higher levels of education from the countries of origin than U.S.-born Anglo. 62% of all Asian immigrants in Houston have college degrees, compared to just 47% of the Anglos in this city. On the other side, Latino immigrants are coming here with striking educational deficits relative to the average education of the average American. Almost half of all Latino immigrants in Houston do not have high school degrees. Fewer than 11% have college degrees. And that is the central challenge that we face as we go forward. Everyone in Houston understands that we are enormous beneficiaries of the far better and less expensive yard work and construction work and nannies and daycare and elder care. And Latino immigrants are happy to be here because they can make $5 to $6 an hour, and the minimum wage in Mexico is 76 cents an hour. And we benefit enormously from the hard work and low wages of Latino immigrants. The great question is what happens to their children going to overcrowded, underfunded inner city schools. part of the anti-immigrant feelings that I'm not going to have a chance to talk about here, except perhaps in discussion. I think Michael Emerson and others might say a few additional words. Part of that anti-immigrant feeling that is emerging in Houston and America comes from this sense that all these people are coming here and they're not learning English, and they are putting these burdens on our resources, and they are making us spend more and more of our taxpayer monies on schools and hospitals, and it isn't fair, and no one consulted with me, and we got to make sure they go back home as soon as possible. We have now reached a large enough number of Latino immigrants in Harris County, Texas, from our surveys, to be able to compare Latino immigrants who have been in the United States for 9 years or less with those who've been here for 10 to 19 years and those who've been here for 20 years or longer, and then compare them to the US-born Latinos of immigrant parents and the third-generation Latinos born in the United States of parents who were also born in the United States. And when you do that, you discover a really quite striking, here's just one example. These are the measures we have of socioeconomic status. If you take this, for example, household income, percentage of Latino immigrants who have been here for 9 years or less who have household incomes greater than $35,000 is 17%, going to 23% of those here 10 to 19 years, 44% of those who've been here for 20 years or longer, 53% of the US-born Latinos of immigrant parents, and 58% of the third generation. Every question we ask shows that same pattern. Do you use a computer in your home or place of residence, a home or place of business? Sorry. Do you and your family currently have any health insurance? Do you live in the city of Houston or in the suburbs? Do you own or rent the place where you live? The capacity of Latino immigrants to coming here, pooling their resources, working from sunup to sundown, able to move out of poverty. Latino immigrants today are moving out of poverty at least as rapidly, if not more rapidly, than the Italians and the Greeks and the Poles did 100 years ago. But the same perception of that they're here and they're not making progress, they're not learning English, they're not moving forward is a false understanding that comes from the fact that you see new immigrants coming all the time. But it is a remarkable picture of the fact that this does remain a land of opportunity, even for people coming here with very low levels of education who are able to make it the longer they are in this country. And I have other measures that show Americanization, speaking English, seeing themselves as Americans rather than Latinos, that all show that very same pattern. It's the central issue for all of us is, of course, this remarkable transformation, this ethnic transformation that can be the greatest asset that Houston could have as it positions itself as the gateway to Latin America. We have the second largest port in the country, the 6th largest port in the world. I tell people just because we're 50 miles from the ocean doesn't mean we can't have a port. That port means that Houston is going to be a world center for trade and commerce in the global economy of the 21st century. It's going to be an enormous advantage for the city to have in positions of economic and political power Black Houstonians, Hispanic Houstonians, Asian Houstonians, to build those bridges to the global marketplace. This ethnic transformation can be the greatest asset that Houston could have, or it could tear us apart and become a major liability. Much depends on how this generation speaks to these remarkable new realities. Let me end this with that famous or that wonderfully insightful way the Chinese language renders the word for crisis. The word for crisis in Chinese is wei ji, consists of 2 characters, one signifying danger and the other opportunity. And I tell people it's not a bad way to think about this remarkable coming together of forces, a set of cards that this generation has been dealt. No one planned for the oil boom to collapse, for Houston to go into major recession and recover into a new kind of economy where education has become so critical. No one planned for the ethnic transformation to take place. These are the cards that this generation has been dealt. How we play those cards, with what kind of wisdom, sensitivity, determination to seize the opportunities and derail the dangers will be the measure of the kind of city, the kind of state, the kind of country that we build together in the 21st century. And our connections to Mexico are going to be central to the kind of reality that we build as the 21st century unfolds. Enough from me. I'm supposed to be the moderator, not a speaker. Let me turn it next. These are the panels. The panelists are all going to be leading major discussions on these issues starting tomorrow. One of the central issues we want to explore together is housing, and Tom Lord is here. There's no one better qualified and better positioned to share that with us. And Tom, let me hand the microphone to you. Okay, thank you. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm privileged to be here and glad to be invited, and always profit from Brother Stephen's remarks. It makes me glad that even though I went to graduate school, I didn't become a scholar because I couldn't measure up to that analysis, but I did become a doer, and I navigate my way through a lot of the forces and trends that Stephen is talking about. Several years ago, I was the housing director of a joint center for urban studies that Rice and University of Houston had, called Southwest Center for Urban Research. We put on a series of seminars, somewhat like this tonight. And one time we had New York Times reporter John Herbers, very prominent reporter for the Times then. He covered a lot of the civil rights time. But I raised a question with Mr. Herbers. I said, why is it that in the New York Times you do a study on urban, or article on urban life, urban trends, and you never include Houston? Bear in mind, this was 1975. He said, because Houston doesn't fit anybody else. That's true. If I had one theme to impart to you international students, I would tell you that you're in a unique city. It all goes back to the fact that we are a private enterprise city. What John really meant when he said that we don't look like other cities is that we don't have zoning. And that, as you all know, has been a controversial subject for many years, always voted down. What zoning brings to a city is a cadre of planners, people who sit in their offices in City Hall and plan how the city is to be developed. I'll never forget, as long as I live, being in Philadelphia and meeting in the office with the greatest planner of the time, Edmund Bacon, who wrote many tomes about city planning. And I'll never forget him pointing to the map and saying, I want this hospital to be here, and I want this park to be here. I'll guarantee you, nobody in Houston ever in City Hall said that. They don't plan. And that may sound negative to a lot of people, but put it on the other side and say, what does it mean? It means that those developers, those groups, those sponsors have a lot of freedom. They do the planning willy-nilly, of course. And so what I've seen since I've come to Houston in 40 years ago, is that when a new population comes to Houston, if they work hard and they think hard, they can do whatever the hell they want to do. And so today I manage, with the cooperation of Chinese Culture Center, 2 projects out on Bel Air for, of course we never say for, but it happens to be 100% Chinese, because they wanted to have a community of their own, and they built it. And this month we will open a new facility for elderly further out on Bel Air. It keeps going further out, as you know, for Vietnamese, because they took the bull by the horns. They said, we want to have housing for our people, and here in America you can do that. And they did it. I want to say as I talk about elderly housing, which we do a lot of, America has a tremendous impact on the migrant. We all know that the character of most Asian and Latin American societies is that an extended family takes care of the elder. I had a classmate, a class student rather, last year from Vietnam. And when we started talking about elderly housing, she was appalled that there would be such a thing as having to put old people in a special place. She thought the children should take care of them. I invited her to go out to Rainbow Village out on Bel Air. And she visited it, and she talked to the manager and talked to many residents. At the end of the course, she told me that she had put her mother in there, because she saw that in America, usually the parents get the idea the children don't really want them there, just like most Americans. And the parents are not too comfortable in a home where both the man and the woman work and nobody's there. The children go to daycare or go to school, and they're lonely. Unlike living in China, where all of them are around. And so they're Americanized in that sense, and I don't think that's necessarily bad. And I don't think that what I'm saying to you is negative at all, in the sense that people who come here and love this country can really do what they want to do. And we're seeing it, and it's a hopeful thing. I will say that the Latin community, the Hispanic community in Houston, is a conundrum to me. As Steve alluded to, I don't do any construction of a housing project without 100% of the workers, the roofers, the tilers, the plumbers, everybody is Hispanic. And yet, of the 14,000 units of housing, very few are occupied by Hispanics, because in part, I believe, they have yet to move as far as I've told you about the Asians, and they still live in extended family situations. And they're younger, and there are a lot of kids, as Steve pointed out, and therefore they move into apartments that are what we call here in Houston C and D, where they'll let 10 kids live in a 2-bedroom apartment. I don't do that. I have federal laws I have to abide by. The main one being not to have anybody that's undocumented. And so all undocumented people are living in less than standard housing usually. But I see great hope in the organization and the spirit of those who've come to this city. And I think that in the end, the openness, the freedom here is a plus for all of them and for all of us. Thank you.
All right, and I too am going to hopefully have the miracle of PowerPoint. Glad to be here. I brought a fancy something or another, but I don't think I'll use it. I think we can, that's too much technology here. So I've been asked to talk about public policy and how that shapes who's here and the kind of the life experiences for people that are here that have coming from other countries. So As I show you on here, I've got pictures of the exact same spot in Houston in 1910, 1950, and then today. And you can see that the skyline changes a bit. And I want to do this. I came across a map of Houston in 1935, and you may not be able to see it because it is hard to read even when you're looking directly at it, as I am. But where Rice is almost on the outskirts. Let's see if I can, yeah, right here. So this is where we are. And right over here it says the Westmoreland Farm. So there's just farms here. So Rice was kind of the edge. Okay, so here would be a map of today, but it's more interesting to compare. So I superimposed and put that map of 1935, that was Houston, even though some of that was farm. And you can see how it compares to Houston today. So a lot of growth, as we would expect. We can look at the population changes here. So in 1930, and I'm just going to go by 30-year increments here, about 500,000 people living here in the Houston metropolitan area. By 1960, it had grown by 1 million people, 1.6 million. By 1990, it had grown by another 2 million. So you can see the pace of growth increases. And today, only 17 years later, we've already grown by another 2 million. So it didn't take us 30 years this time, it took us 18 years. We should be at 6 million by 2010, and we'll just keep going. Okay, so what does that have to do with what we're talking about? Well, what drives this growth, overwhelmingly, is immigrants. So if we look just at the city of Houston, currently 2.2 million people. Over a quarter of them are foreign born. So it doesn't include their children, that's people that were actually born somewhere else, a different country, and have moved here. Of these, 73% are not U.S. citizens. So they're here under a variety of different titles, which I will look at in just a moment. So we have lots of people that are here but not officially citizens. Of the foreign born, 3/4 are from Latin America, 16% from Asia, and that constitutes most of who is here. And this is just to compare the overall metro, and the figures are fairly similar, although we find more Asians and less Hispanics out in the suburbs than we do in the central city. So just the city of Houston, there are currently over 900,000 people who classify themselves as Hispanic, and that's the way we measure things. According to the census, people say how they identify themselves, and they represent about 42% of the city. Asians, I missed a zero there, but it's supposed to say 110,000, 5% of the city proper. So of Hispanics, again, it's overwhelmingly 3/4 are from Mexico, and very small percentages from Puerto Rico and Cuba, but about a little over 2 out of every 10 are from Central and South America. The Census Bureau doesn't actually break those down into individual categories in the overall data, although that's going to change. Of the Asians that are here in Houston, the most common to be is Vietnamese, 30%, followed by Chinese and Asian Indian. And again, if we compare to the overall metro, there are almost 2 million Hispanics in the metropolitan area now, 325,000 Asians, and the Hispanic distribution is about the same, but Asians, there you're more likely to find the Asian Indians as opposed to Vietnamese that you find in the city. What is this a map of? This is a map of where Hispanics live in Harris County, which is the county that Houston sits in. So the dark green means it's majority Hispanic neighborhoods. And you can see that these neighborhoods kind of follow a path. Most of the middle of the north side and the southern side. This gap in here is largely African American. This area here that's very low is where the older Anglos tend to live. And there are fewer and fewer, and their neighborhoods get smaller and smaller. And you can see how many neighborhoods are at least a quarter. Even when we go way out to the edges, we're still finding a quarter Hispanic. And all through the southwestern part of the city and way down into the Nassau and those areas. So that's one thing that's been very unique about Hispanics, is different from many other groups, is the vast distribution across metropolitan areas. Okay, just one more slide here on the immigrants. According to the data for 2007, There are 1 million people who do not speak English at home, or about 45%. So nearly 1 out of every 2 Houstonians speak another language at home. Doesn't mean they can't speak English, but it means at home they're speaking something else. It's those 28% foreign-born and their children, for the most part. Of those who don't speak English at home, 54% do not speak English very well. They speak less than very well, according to their self-reports. Of the people not speaking English at home, 84% are Spanish, 7% Asian. And this is in Houston proper. If we go into the whole metro, it's more likely to be Asian, but still overwhelmingly Latino or Hispanic. So that's an issue too. So I was asked to address this. Who establishes immigration policies? And what is the role of Houston, the city, and the metro? And the roles are essentially nothing, because this is one area where local rights and state rights get overridden by federal law. And especially since 2001, when we had the 9/11 date, things have really changed here, so that the federal government has more and more control. What are the goals of the federal government in accepting people into the U.S.? There are 4 categories. Reunite families. They don't say this term, but it's what it is. It's brain drain. They want the best, the brightest, the most talented, and people with $1 million or more, and they'll let you in. Okay. And then refugees, people that are trying to get asylum or having difficulties in their home country and their lives are in danger, a certain percentage we will take. And then for diversity reasons, which is a really new one, especially given what Dr. Kleinberg said. In the past, that would have never been there. Okay, so in terms of overall immigrants, about 3/4 of all immigrants come under the reunite families. When we changed our federal laws in 1965 for immigrants, we made one little unrestricted category, and that was, if you're here, you can have your parents or your children under 21 come, and they don't count against the overall totals. So the federal government tries to put a ceiling on how many come, but they left that one untouched. So as families came, they didn't keep in mind, they were thinking European family, a couple of children perhaps, and maybe a parent they might bring. But families that were large, families that wanted to bring both parents. So about, like I say, 3/4 come under this, and of that, 42% are unrestricted. It's simply bringing parents and bringing children here. And that can happen as soon as somebody is here legally. 10 to 15% or 10 to 20% is the brain drain people, the people that are highly qualified and are deemed to offer advantages to the competitiveness of the U.S. economy. 5 to 10% are refugees, and then we're pretty much fixed at 5% diversity. So what the government does is say, we need more African immigrants, and so they will give more. What they're actually doing, and this is interesting, actually giving more now to European immigrants because so few come. So they come under the diversity category. And then finally, out of the millions of applications that don't fit under this other, every year now there's a lottery in which 100,000 people are randomly selected. And if they get selected, then they have the right to come here under the green card, which I'm told is now really pink, but which makes you legal. I actually live next to a large family. It was they were from Ireland, mom, dad, parents, and 7 children. And they got here under the lottery. They had just won the lottery, and so they came. So there are about 1 million, even though our official ceiling is something like we won't accept more than 290,000 a year. We typically have about 1 million immigrants admitted per year, plus another 5 to 7 million people that come under temporary visas. These are work visas. I think I have them here. Work visas, student visas, visiting visas. Some of those people come and never go back. Again, I keep running to Irish, but I worked in Chicago with an Irish student, came under the student visa, decided he didn't want to go home, and he got hired at a bank that I was working at, and they just paid him under the table, and so he stayed. Now, part of that reason then is that we then end up with this: 200,000 people on average per year are removed. So they have faced trials and they are sent back. So that's quite a number, but it's a small percent actually of the overall number of people that come. So since 2002, after 9/11, we established a whole new structure in the government, the Department of Homeland Security. We used to have the Naturalization Services, and that was basically disbanded, reorganized so that all immigration issues now come under the Department of Homeland Security. And they have responsible for all immigration services, for border enforcement, and for border inspections. And they're organized with different bureaus underneath them that have specific tasks that they're in charge of. Okay, so here are the categories, and there are 4 categories according to the government. You can be a legal permanent resident, meaning you have a green card that says you can stay here. And eventually that can lead to being a citizen, U.S. citizen. You can come under these temporary visas that we talked about, and as we said, it's probably 5 to 7 million a year given to those. You can be undocumented. We don't ever know exactly how many people are undocumented. I can say that in we're doing research where we randomly selected immigrants and we're interviewing them, that about half of our Hispanic immigrants are not here with legal papers. So some people say it's up to half of those who are here. Some say it's less. And the government uses this term as the last category, absconders. Interesting term. This means people that have been essentially tried and they're due to be sent back and they've just disappeared. And they haven't followed the order to go back to wherever they came from. How do you get to the U.S.? You go to the U.S. embassies and consulates in the country you're in, and you apply for one of these types of visas. If awarded, then you can come with papers. If you do come here with a green card and you want to become a resident, this is actually less than it used to be. My maternal side came from Italy, and they had to wait quite a while to become citizens. Now it's 3 to 5 years of residency. We still have this characteristic requirement of good moral character, and I'm never sure exactly how they measure it, but one thing for sure, if you have a criminal record that's not defined as good moral character, and that makes it difficult. They do test you on how well you know English. You don't have to be perfect, but to become a citizen, you have to speak at a certain level. You have to sign and say you are willing to defend and support the U.S. Constitution and the U.S. overall. And you have to demonstrate knowledge of U.S. history and government, and they actually have to take tests on that, and people study. I've talked with Hispanic pastors here in Houston and Hispanic priests that have Hispanics as parishioners. And what they say for people that are children of undocumented, your best way to be able to stay here, to be able to go to college, be able to get a job, is to join the military. And so they recommend it, and that's what people do. Because if you join the military, they often waive these requirements. For example, you wouldn't have to wait 3 to 5 years. You can get permanent papers and so on. Now, it all sounds good, but there's just a massive backlog, hundreds of thousands of people applying for citizenship. There are not enough people to keep up with it, and so the time can be forever. And what we find in talking to people is you have to be persistent, you have to be willing to wait years, and if you have money, that helps grease the wheels a little bit to get things done. And there are actually a whole black market out there where people will do that work for you. If you pay them, they'll find ways to get you legal and get you to be a citizen. Okay, I want to look just briefly at undocumented immigrants. It's a fairly large presence here in Houston and very important to the economy. Perhaps 50% of immigrants here are undocumented. So we're talking about a large percentage. I want to look at some benefits and some costs. Okay, so if you are undocumented, you are able to receive some government services, but not others. So I want to show you which ones you can and can't. So you have the right to have your children get K through 12 education, and I know that we will hear about education in just a moment. You have the right for emergency medical care, whether you are insured, whether you are here legally or not. Children with special needs can get health care. Substance abuse services are, let's see here, not available to the undocumented. That should say available to the undocumented. You can have immunizations. Let's see. I'm going to do this. I want to make sure. Yeah, these are the ones that are not available to you. Okay? Sorry about that. I should have checked that. Okay, so what you cannot access: Medicare and Medicaid, cash assistance programs, children's health insurance programs, which is interesting. That's one of the critiques of the U.S. policy system, that we punish children in many ways, even though they did not make these decisions. You're not eligible for food stamps, for supplemental security income, for public housing assistance, for job opportunities for low-income persons, and again here on children. You are not eligible for child care and development. What are some benefits and costs to these? Okay, so clearly, as we've seen, immigrants drive the growth of Houston. They drive the growth right now of most of the United States. The Texas state government just put out a report, and they estimate that immigrants to Texas add over $30 billion to the gross Texas product, to the overall production of the state. So it's a rather major influence. Because Texas has, as a few other states have, a tax structure in which we do not tax income. We tax basically when you spend the money rather than when you get it. So we tax property tax and sales tax and so on. They find that that actually works better when you have lots of undocumented people. Because although there's ways to hide whether you're getting paid, it's pretty hard to hide when you go to the store and buy groceries. And so you're paying a tax on that. So it actually works more efficiently for the state in collecting taxes that they have this kind of system. Just looking at it undocumented only, their estimate in Texas is that they added $1.58 billion in state revenue through the taxes they're paying when they're buying things, and that they cost $1.16 billion to state services. So the state is saying they're actually making money on undocumented people. Okay, that sounds like a deal. Might as well have more of them. But there's a problem. The problem is, as we're going to see, when we get to the negatives, is that these costs get shifted to cities like Houston. The local governments end up paying the costs. Another benefit is that they fill major gaps in employment. As you said, almost all of your workers, Hispanic. And I imagine most are immigrants. Is that true? Yep. Filling jobs that otherwise we wouldn't have the people for. Certainly keep Houston amazingly affordable. When I look at why does it cost more to live in certain places, you can trace part of that effect to what kind of wages are being paid and who are the workers. So Houston gets that benefit, and it has cheap, affordable housing and other things. Cultural vibrancy and dynamism for sure. And it generates additional jobs. All the folks that come and work in housing, construction, in other services, they too buy things. They too go to restaurants. They too need housing of their own. So they create even more jobs. Some costs are the fact that the policy burden gets shifted to local places. So in Texas, the local communities, Houston, Dallas, other cities, and local counties, paid $142 million out of their own tax money in local incarceration costs of undocumented people, and $1.3 billion in hospital and medical costs. Since they have the right to emergency medical care, that amount of money gets shifted to the local government. So it's quite a burden for the local. Now, they have the right under federal law to apply, if they can show that this is going to undocumented, they have a right to apply to get some of that paid back by the federal government. But it's quite a process to get that. Because of undocumented people, we get a whole underground economy of people that prey on the undocumented. So illegal enterprises that are promising them legal status and then take their money. You know, we have the whole system of the coyotes that will promise to bring people across, and we hear again and again they just disappear, or they're not successful in getting them across, but they still have the money that they've given up. Exploitation of all sorts. If you are scared to be discovered, you will put up with a whole lot. So we find that employers actually can undercut and pay a lot less. We find that in neighborhoods, people will either be hiding from the police, will not call. When we talk to the medical people, they say they often won't show up for fear, even though they have the right to get emergency medical care. They don't think that's true and that they'll be deported. And so people suffer great health consequences as well. There's massive mistrust of local authorities, and it makes it difficult for the police, for example, to do their jobs in a lot of these neighborhoods because there's so much mistrust of what they're there for. The local Houston police, for example, have no authority whatsoever to arrest somebody that's undocumented. That's not their jurisdiction. They can help in the process if the federal government asks them to, but they can't on their own do that. Because of our policies, we separate families. So we send people back if we find them undocumented. But say they had their children here. They came undocumented, their children were born here, they're American citizens. According to our law, mom or dad gets sent back, children can stay. And we do see that quite a bit, so that we get these issues of separated families. But here's what's interesting, then the children, as they get a little older, have the right to bring their parents back. So we have this crazy system of spending money to send people back, and then we can bring them back into the U.S. All right. Lost sense of identity, perceived competition for jobs and undercutting. So I'm going to look at a couple of graphs here, but there's a growing sense that there's too much immigration. People are taking jobs, people are changing their culture. So we have racial tension that can increase, mistrust. In Houston, if we ask the question about discrimination, 70% of Latinos say the discrimination against Hispanics happens very frequently, or at least fairly often, to them, to their family. Now these are kind of hard to see, so I'll describe what they say. There's two lines here. The top line, the blue line, says the increasing ethnic diversity in Houston brought about by immigration is a good thing versus a bad thing. So since 1994 up through about the early 2000s, it was on an upward trajectory. It started to decline in 2004, 2005. The below orange line says the increasing ethnic diversity in Houston will eventually become a source of great strength for the city. And again, increasing up to about 70%, and now it's gone down 10% in the last couple of years. Same thing here. I'm not going to go into great detail of what's happened, just to show you that it's the same pattern. The questions here are, during the next 10 years, should we admit more or the same number of legal immigrants? New immigration mostly strengthens American culture, and we should take action to reduce the number of new immigrants. This graph here is the percent that disagree with that. So again, we see that same pattern of something happening in about 2004, 2005, and then we ask people to rank race relations. And this all comes from Steve Kleinberg's data. We can see over time, there's been this big drop. What's going on? A couple of things we think, as we've talked about it, but we still don't know for sure. One is that we had Katrina evacuees, 100 to 200,000 came, and the year after we started to see this decline in the way that people ranked race relations here. So that was one issue. And at the same time, it sort of spread out to, there are too many Hispanics, they're taking over. This is about when it was announced that Hispanics are now the majority of Houston. They're the majority of Harris County, will soon be the majority of the entire metropolitan area. So then other people feel a sense of, I'm getting what is mine taken away from me. Okay, in concluding thoughts, just want to make a couple here, just two. Immigration is a tremendous benefit to the U.S. economic system. Every study I've ever read by economists or whoever find that indeed that's what it does. But we are in a silly game of political posturing on our policy, and that is we pretend that that's not true. But because we know it's true, and this is what I'm putting words into what I think politicians do at the federal level, because I think they know it benefits the economy, but that the people in a democracy mostly say they don't want people to just be able to cross borders. They have to, A, look like they're being strong and border patrol and making sure people don't cross, and then B, making sure people actually do get through and fill all these jobs that we need to be filled. Yeah. So what really is happening here? We are simultaneously saying we need to integrate across the Americas in our economies and our flow of information and our flow of all kinds of political relations, and at the same time we say, but we want to be separate. And it's sort of denying the basic fact that if you're going to have economics and everything else flow across the Americas, you also need people to be able to do that, depending on where work is and where work is not. Just like within any country, we let people flow in that country to different places when the jobs are there. So I think that's a basic thing, and I'm hoping tomorrow when we talk among the panelists that we can focus on that issue in each country and see what their perspectives are. Thank you very much.
Okay, and finally on education and then we'll be ready for questions and comments and thoughts.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you. I'm really excited. Actually, when I received the call, invited to attend, I thought, okay, I will do my best, but I do work for the Houston Independent School District, and in my capacity as the executive principal over elementary schools, and we're divided into regions and feeder patterns, I have the fun part of the job. I'm passionate about teaching and learning, so in my position, I get to make sure that I facilitate instruction in the schools and that the teachers are well prepared and well equipped to teach our children. If you reflect when you were in elementary school, and for some of you that does not look like that was too long ago, but I was a product of a baby boomer, attending public schools in the late 1960s, early 1970s, and I often reflect when I walk into buildings now, wow, school is different. The classrooms look different. The teachers look different. Dr. Emerson did make a comment about documented or undocumented. It doesn't matter. Our role is not to question the status of a parents, immigration, how they got here. We simply, when they bring the kids, let's get them enrolled in school and let's start the project, the process of education. Is it different? Yes, it's different. We preface almost every meeting in HISD by saying we have to change the way people think. We have to change the way people think about teaching and learning. We have to change the way administrators feel about teaching and learning. We have to change the way teachers think about teaching and learning. Is it different? Again, yes. HISD is rich in diversity, very, very rich. Immigrants from any nationality, we still have the challenge of providing an appropriate, a quality education. Are there challenges? Yes, there are, because we have to be creative in finding teachers who can actually reach our children when they don't come to school speaking English. No matter what the language is, we have to provide an education in their language. And we typically do a good job at it, and I enjoy it because, then again, I'm just an advocate for children. But we do have bilingual education. We teach children in their home language, and we try to help them master their home language and learn in their home language before they can transition into English. Typically, that's what you will find in a lot of HISD schools. The richness, though, and what's brought into the school by our non-English speakers, I don't know if anyone is familiar with a dual language program, but not only, of course, our immigrants, the parents want their kids to learn English, but it's opened a door now to where most English-speaking parents want their children educated in Spanish. So in a school now, you'll find various types of educational programs. You'll find the regular education setting, of course, where you have most people who were born and raised here in America, and of course the instruction is in English, and then you will have students who are taught in Spanish. We have students who are taught in Chinese. We have students who are taught in Vietnamese. And then we have people who look a lot like me and most of you here. We are actually taught in Spanish. And I find that quite interesting because just as in a bilingual education class or a regular education class, and the kids may be instructed in English, but the parents, may not have the ability to help them at home, so we have to be creative again. But still in the dual language program, I have a daughter who is instructed in Spanish, and guess who cannot help her at home? So I depend heavily on the educational institution just as any immigrant parent would. We're challenged with, of course, providing the personnel to appropriately educate the kids. And like I said earlier, we have to be creative in attracting that talent, because we do want the best. We have a lot of immigrants who are economically disadvantaged based on their socioeconomic status. And, you know, they may live in the poor areas of the city, and it's challenging to provide a good education with a shortage of money. We have to spend a lot of money in training for the teachers. We have to make sure that if I do have a Spanish-speaking child in my class, because the parents do not want their children in a bilingual setting, they want their children, even though the children or the parents may speak English in a regular education setting, we have to make accommodations for that, because right now our system allows that. And we're challenged with financing what's appropriate in the classroom. I've talked about the new trends in the educational institutions with the dual language, but even with all of that, and I do have to guard what I say on behalf of HISD, because I'm just here in a visiting capacity, not a legal, capacity to speak about percentages or, who does what, or who may outperform another ethnic race. But we are closing the gaps with our minority students. And right now, HISD is more minority than it is Anglo, with the different backgrounds that have entered our doors. But we are becoming very successful in closing the gaps. Our students want to learn, their parents want them to learn. And I think because of that, it makes our job a lot easier. We have a lot of challenges that I just really can't get into tonight, and I know I'm looking forward to meeting with the fellows tomorrow to elaborate on that in little smaller, intimate settings more. But because that success is so real to some of our students, and because our parents are here who, for the large part, are uneducated, they want the best for their kids. And that causes us to be able to close the gap a lot easier, because they give us the support that we need. Even though they may not have the money, they may not speak the language. Most schools now even try to provide English as a second language classes to help the parents be able to communicate with us. But I was reading the handout from Dr. Kleinberg, and I did tell Ms. De La Garza that I was going to be brief, but I do want to close with actually something that I have here on your handout, and I think I will use this in my position as I work with teachers and other administrators. But if this region, and I can substitute that with, if this district is to flourish in the new century, we'll need to develop a much more inclusive, multi-ethnic society, one in which equality of opportunity is truly made available to all citizens, and all of Houston's families are empowered to help their children succeed in their schools and in their lives. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much to a wonderful panel. We have some great questions here. Erica, should I just start off? Want to group them? Okay. Let me offer one to. I have two questions for Tom Lord.
Okay.
Okay. One of them is: did you say in Houston that you cannot lease property to people who don't have legal documents?
Right.
If so, how is this law enforced?
Well, our staff, our managers, have to enforce it by giving out documents which has to be signed and verified. So we're our own enforcers, because at any moment we could be reviewed by the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and are audited by them quite often. So this is one of the Dr. Emerson's no benefit area, and yet here they all are.
So it's one can get away with it, but it's always a risk in that sense. I mean,
I did ask in preparation for this meeting tonight, asked one of the managers just this kind of question: how do you really monitor it? And the first thing she said was that, as we've alluded to here tonight, most of the undocumented people are so afraid of official authority that they don't even show up. They don't want to put their name down on one of our forms that they think might be reviewed by the government.
Great, thank you. This is from Mr. Emerson. Are there closed neighborhoods or ghettos as a defensive response to discrimination in Houston? And what are the right policies to take toward those neighborhoods?
Okay, and this is focusing on, does it say which groups or immigrants? This is something we don't know a whole lot about, especially with Latinos, with the large neighborhoods of Latinos. Are they choosing to be there as a defense against discrimination? Or what we find more often is that they're choosing to be there because that's where they have family, and that's the entry points where they already know people. So we see that. So what's the correct policy on that? One of the things is that we find, of course, that especially with Latinos and Asians, and it works a little different than for African Americans, is as they become more educated, more employed, and legal status, they don't stay in neighborhoods like Magnolia for very long. They end up moving to suburbs and integrating into more mixed communities. So I think that that's the major policy for the immigrant groups.
Question for Mrs. Daly. What do you see as the main challenges of the current education system for immigrants? What is the main challenge that immigrants pose to the education systems in Houston?
The main challenge that immigrants pose?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's not quite the question. Is this, what are the main challenges of the current education system for immigrants? So either way, what are the challenges that immigrants face dealing with education in Houston? Or what are the challenges for the educational system of dealing with the immigrants?
I will address it. What are the challenges of the educational system? And like I said earlier, because we receive children who speak so many languages, attracting the quality personnel to provide the appropriate education in their home language to be able to transition them into our language, of course, which is English.
Is it can I just ask a follow-up? Is it a requirement that you must educate in the native language of the person, and for how long? And who makes the requirement? Is that state level?
To be honest, I am aware of several districts, even within the state of Texas. Our policies are just different. In HISD, we provide first language instruction, but I do know of surrounding suburban districts who don't do that. The students, if they come into the district, they're taught in English because they don't provide a bilingual education, but in HISD we do.
A question for all of us, I guess partly for me, is two similar questions. How can we as a city help the older Anglo population realize that it is in the best interest of Houston to supply non-Anglo youth with more education and health resources? And a similar question, given that social security system will depend somewhat at least on the young taking care of the old, is there a concern now that the older are more likely to be Anglo and the younger more likely to be non-Anglo? So it's that sense one has of the need to build an intergenerational compact. And what I tell people in some of these talks I give is that, older Anglos, as baby boomers, as they move into retirement, have a stake in ensuring that younger Latinos and African Americans are prepared to succeed and get the good jobs of the 21st century so they can make a lot of money so we can tax the daylights out of them to support us in our retirement. And it's clear that there's a critical sort of intergenerational reality there, and the question is, how do we enhance the recognition of that mutual dependence that is there? How do we get older Anglos who are overwhelmingly still the ones most likely to vote in favor of raising taxes to improve the public schools? Anyone want to comment further? I agree, said Einstein.
I will say this. We in HISD do strive to become a district of choice, and our public image to the constituents of HISD, our taxpayers, that image is really real, and that question we actually talk about a lot. We pose that question to each other, and we talk about that with our students. We must educate them because to us, they are here to stay.
They are the citizens and voters and taxpayers of America.
Definitely, and we have to make them productive citizens of society. That's why we do all we can to make sure that they do graduate 12th grade. Our goal is to graduate all of our students, but to make them college and career ready so that they can become taxpayers and take care of us when it's time to retire.
Hear, hear. A question for all of us. What should President-elect Barack Obama do to improve the immigration situation as it currently exists? Who wants to take that? And what are the prospects that we now might finally be able to have a more rational immigration policy in the next couple of years?
I'll sit back on that.
Okay. I'll start. But so when we increased Border Patrol and said ostensibly we are going to be stricter about who gets across, we're putting more people at more sites and forcing crossing, what have we found? The probability of crossing today that you'll successfully do it is greater than it has ever been. And that's where I'm saying that we still talk out of two sides of our mouth. And what we ought to do is recognize, and I think it's a simple solution. Undocumented is not good for anybody in the long run. So why have to be that? You don't have to give permanent legal status either. You can give temporary work visas that can go for multiple years, that can that's why people are coming. They're coming for work. We need the workers, so why not just provide that? I think that's one change that will be discussed. We'll see if it makes it.
Do you think the prospects have improved? My colleague Bob Stein, who's of course a major person in tracking political attitudes, has said that the Republican Party, he thinks, has learned from this last election that you don't win elections by being anti-immigrant and by being perceived, allowing your party to be perceived as anti-Latino. And he thinks that we're going to see a real change in the whole politics of Republicans and Democrats coming together on a rational solution. The other thing I tell people also about, we have 12 million undocumented immigrants in America. One of the reasons we have so many undocumented immigrants is that we do not allow enough people to come here legally to do the jobs that we desperately need to be done by people who desperately need to do them. There are 1.8 million illegal immigrants in Texas, and the Greater Houston Partnership commissioned a study by economists at SMU to ask what would happen to the Texas economy if you rounded up these 1.8 million workers and sent them back home. And the answer is obvious. It would decimate the Texas economy. It would destroy all the agriculture and construction work and restaurant and entertainment work areas. It would be the dumbest thing that this country could conceivably do to itself, right? And then meanwhile, as Michael was saying, when you've got so many undocumented immigrants who are afraid to go to the police when they are being cheated out of their wages, when they are kept in the shadows, it hurts all of us. And so it does seem to me that there's an opportunity now to come together in a rational policy that can work for the United States and repair our relations with Mexico at the same time. And that's going to be, I think, the great challenge as we go forward.
Can I add one more thing? Sure. So far, we tend to make our immigration policies in a way we do differently when we're talking about economic policies and such. A lot of times we work with other countries to see what will work best. We do NAFTA, where we have to work together with other countries. with immigration policy, we don't ask Mexico or Colombia or Canada. We just make our own. It seems to me that in the future we're going to actually have to work together across the Americas to figure out what works best for all of us.
And there's a chance that we might finally be able to do that. Several wonderfully interesting questions. You guys are very good out there. One is about coalitions among minority populations. Majority minority populations do not always translate to minority coalitions. How would you rate the current state of relations among Houston's Black, Latino, and Asian communities, and any predictions for the future? Any thoughts on that? What happens in schools between African American and Latino kids? They form easy friendships, or do they tend to separate out to some degree?
I think a classroom is a safe haven for children. And because you have so many ethnicities in one class, and you have a teacher that's facilitating teaching and learning and getting along, they learn from each other, and their friendships form a very strong bond.
Yeah. In our surveys, we do see anti-immigrant feelings among African Americans, and they come from a very different place than the anti-immigrant feelings among Anglos. Michael showed some of our questions. One of them was, do you think that the increasing ethnic diversity, or do you think that the new immigration strengthens American culture or threatens American culture? It is Anglos who are much more likely than African Americans to say immigration threatens American culture. Question that said, do immigrants generally contribute more to the American economy than they take, or do they take more than they contribute? African Americans are more likely than Anglos to say they take more than they contribute. The economic consequences of immigration are felt more strongly in the African American community. The cultural consequences are felt more among Latinos, among Anglos. And it's in general a kind of sense of coalitions forming among African Americans and Latinos over central issues that they share with regard to access to health care, with regard to education, and then some inevitable clashes as well. And this is not surprising that these things operate in various ways. But we are all learning in a city like Houston to feel more and more comfortable with the diversity, and to feel more and more able to form relationships and friendships across these communities. One other quick thing from our surveys, it is older Anglos who are by far the most uncomfortable with all of these transformations. And I always tell people you have to be gentle with Anglos. This is a time of major change in their worlds that they inhabit. But on every single measure, the younger you are as an Anglo adult, the more comfortable you are. And one quick example of that is a question we asked just sort of for fun last year. We asked of Anglos, have you ever been involved in a romantic relationship with someone who is non-Anglo? And an absolutely beautiful linear relationship with age. The younger you were, the more like you say, yeah. So, and a really quite striking sense that this new generation of young people is the largest generation of young people ever in American history, the most ethnically diverse of any generation, obviously, ever in American history. And by every measure that we sociologists can come up with, the most comfortable with ethnic diversity that we have ever seen in American history. And so there's a sense of a movement and a development that is going to unfold as the 21st century continues.
Can I add one more thing? So the U.S. has always been racialized, and by that, where race is a central component. So one of the things is that we track is skin color, the degree of darkness of Hispanic, ranging from very light to very dark. They have very different outcomes. They are much more likely, if you're light-skinned, to live in suburbs and live with Anglos. You're much more likely, if you're dark-skinned Hispanic, to live with African Americans in cities. In terms of unemployment rates, it goes from something like, we have a scale of 1 to 7 in terms of skin color. Light-skinned Anglos at the lightest level, 2% unemployed. At the darkest level, something like 15% unemployed. So we also overlay that. And I think that we will see this bifurcation. Some will sort of become part of the new white America or whatever. I mean, this is the debates we have, and some will become part of a whole nother class or whatever. So it'll be interesting to see. But we're seeing some signs of that.
But it's also kind of remnants of a past rather than likely to be really shaping the future, I think. What central. This is what makes this moment in the history of Houston and in our own lives such a fascinating moment. It's a time of just extraordinary change, and we need to think outside the box. We need to work in new ways. We need to work together, and we need to understand why there are insecurities and anxieties and conflicts, but also what enormous opportunities this brings to us if we can manage it the right way. Here's a question for Mr. Lord. Is, in your opinion, segregated public housing or migrant communities good public policy in terms of social ties within the community versus the integration of communities? Do we find segregation dominating in public housing, and is that a serious problem, or is that understandable?
Well, you heard me carefully say we don't say a property is for Chinese or for Vietnamese or for Hispanics or for blacks. That's against fair housing laws. But the fact is, if you build a facility along Bel Air, you're going to have Oriental people living there. We're in that melting pot stage where the pressure is to coalesce and strengthen themselves. We hope that maybe someday they would, go to the third generation and not be a fortress against the outside world, but right at the beginning they are. So we take measures. We have to take measures, again, under fair housing laws to be sure that if we locate a property in a African-American area like we did Independence Heights, we advertise in the Anglo papers or go to Anglo churches and make an effort. We have to make an effort, and we do make an effort in all cases. But it's going uphill because the property will reflect the neighborhood by and large.
The key point here, I think, is that we have become a city and a nation of immigrants again, after 50 years of no immigration. And immigrants always, in all of our history, have tended to congregate together, to go into co-ethnic enclaves where people speak the language. There are Mexican villages that go specifically to New York, other villages that go to Los Angeles. Our village is San Luis de Potosí. The people from San Luis come to Houston, and that tendency of that first generation dissipates rapidly in the second and third generation. So I think that's a part of just being a city of immigrants again, when we have for 50 years not had that experience of large numbers of immigrants. This is a question for Ms. Daly. Most of the books in HISD school libraries are about Anglos, but written by Anglos. Hispanic students don't relate necessarily very well to those books. What plans does HISD have to enable the libraries to reflect the school's ethnic population?
I can answer that to a certain degree, because I do know as we find books who are written by people other than Anglo, we purchase them. And we try to make sure that in each school, in each library, even in each classroom library, that the children have a good representation of who they are as well as actually what history is. I think you'll find more books than people think are available and in schools. Actually, they're in place so that children can read about people who look like them and who speak their language, and they can feel comfortable and grow and know who they are.
So we really are making progress on that.
A lot of progress.
Here's a question that isn't directly related to immigration, but is one we ought to have something to say about. Because of no zoning, Houston is a uniquely ugly city. Will this matter to our future well-being? I'm not sure we want to. Do you want to buy the premise of that? Tom, you want to say
no, I don't buy that. I often say, well, we're unzoned. Dallas is zoned. Is there any difference? I grew up there. I don't think so. I've often said that in Dallas, if you build an apartment project and you do your pro forma of expenses that you're going to entail, you automatically put on there legal fees for zoning variance. You know, it's just another layer of work that you have to do to get the same thing done, build the apartments where you want to build them.
The permitting process is much more complicated.
Yes.
But there's a certain ugly patchwork quality to Houston.
Well,
but that is not the zoning?
I'll be angel's advocate here. We have in Houston, as all of you know, the most elaborate deed restriction system in America because we have no zoning. I don't worry, and you don't worry, about Southampton or Old Braeswood being inundated by taverns and bars. We're more protected actually than you would be in Dallas, because they can get a variance there. There's no variance to a deed restriction. It's the hardest thing on earth to overcome. It is true there are neighborhoods who get lax and slack, and if there's a precedent of breaking them, then they lose their power. But nevertheless, we have a strong deed restriction system. You know, back when I was working for the mayor, Welch, and we had this whole big issue that we're just raising here, there was a scholar from University of Chicago who did about a 2-year-long study. I can't remember his name now, but he was a very eminent scholar, and he concluded that, as I've tried to indicate, that when you really get down to it, there's not that much difference.
And I think you can add to that the city is clearly understanding that in order to attract the talent that we need to attract to build the industries, the knowledge industries of the 21st century, we've got to make Houston a city that people who can live anywhere will say, I want to live in Houston. And there's a growing movement in terms of downtown revitalization, in terms of there's a business case for planting trees. There's a goal to turn the bayous that were basically concretized by the Army Corps of Engineers in the cheapest possible way to serve as drainage ditches and restore them into becoming linear parks. The Buffalo Bayou Coalition. So there's a serious effort now to tear down the billboards and landscape the freeways, so the 2 major roads that you take from the airport are not among the ugliest roads in America, but green parkways leading you into a green city. We've made enormous progress on air pollution controls. There is a new awareness that the strategies for economic prosperity for Houston require of us that we make this city a place that people who can live anywhere will say, I want to live in Houston. And you can see that beginning to develop on a whole variety of dimensions.
I can't resist being from Chicago, and I would say one change for Houston, take down the fences. There are just so many ugly fences. It just says, everybody stay away from me. This is my property.
Okay.
Yeah, but who's going to decide what fence is nice?
And whose fence? Here's another very serious and central question that we haven't really addressed. Why are so many Hispanics dropping out of school? And what is HISD doing to correct this problem? And it's a broader one than that. It's not just HISD, but it is what I want to just do another preface on this. Of all the 199,530 people currently enrolled in HISD classrooms from kindergarten to senior in high school, 60% are Latino kids and 28% are African American. 79% of the children of HISD, who are the children of Houston, 79% are qualified for reduced or free lunch programs. They are living in poverty. We know what poverty does to your ability to succeed in the public schools. And it is a safe statement to make that if Houston's African-American, Latino young people are unprepared to succeed in the knowledge economy of the 21st century, it is hard to envision a prosperous future for Houston. That is who we are and will be as the 21st century unfolds. So probably the most critical question for Houston's future is, what are we doing with the dropout rate? That is what, about 50% of Latino males do not graduate from high school?
It is large, and I really don't know the exact percentage, but I do know that that's a problem that's facing society across the states. But it is a problem, a challenge for HISD, and we are attempting to think outside of the box and be creative in keeping our children in school. We've created virtual schools. in an effort to help kids achieve their degrees online. We have night schools for our kids who feel as though, their responsibilities are so great that they need to, work to support their family for whatever reasons. But we are coming up with as many possible solutions and as many possible ways to keep the kids in school. Unfortunately, it is something that we do tackle and battle every year.
Any other comments? Houston does have, in addition to HISD, which is, Saavedra's talking about, we're going to build a college-going culture so that kids, even in kindergarten, begin to think about college and think about, but we also have the KIPP and YES schools that are public charter schools that are remarkably successful and are models for the rest of the country. And how do you see, is that going to be a healthy competition between KIPP and YES and HISD?
I think it's a very healthy competition, and I can't even sit here and say that I don't agree with KIPP and Yes I Can philosophy, because I do. And actually in HISD, we've adopted that model, especially KIPP's model, in some of our public schools to try to keep our kids in the school system and graduate them. I'm a proponent of what they do because I think they do what's right for kids, but it's competitive, but it's a good competition. It's a good, healthy competition.
Okay. And you're optimistic that we're succeeding and this next generation will be ready, able to take care of us?
I have to be optimistic. I believe in what I do, and I believe in the direction that we're going in, because I'm not going to be, well, I won't tell my age, but I won't be this age all the time. And when I graduate, or when my students now who are in elementary school leave that to go on to college, I've got to be comfortable in knowing that I'm going to retire in a system that will allow me to still have a comfortable lifestyle, knowing though that I can trust those who are in charge and in authority.
Great. Thank you very much. I think this is probably the right time to end it, unless there's anybody who has a burning question that we're not able to ask. But I think we probably covered this pretty well. This is a wonderful opportunity for all of us to be here, and we're very grateful to all of you for sharing this evening with us. And stay tuned. These issues are not going to go away, but they do, I think, represent something of the remarkable historical moment that Houston and all of us are in at this as we build the new America of the 21st century. Thank you all very, very much for being here, and thank you to the panel. Come again tomorrow.